Okay, next up is Sophia to talk about how to handle migrating and retyping non-encrypted volumes to encrypted volumes of the same size, which has been a remarkable pain point. So take it away, Sophia.
Hey, well, it's me again, talking about retyping encrypted volumes. Can you believe it? So, yeah, last time we met, I think we agreed to propose an spec for changing the API and the volume manager. The idea was to let the user to decide for himself if to allow a resize before retyping. But many concerns came up, and maybe a better approach would be if the user requests 1G volume, Cinder gives 1G to write data into it. It should be transparent to the user, and the user shouldn't care if the volume is encrypted or not. So just for the sake of completeness, in case someone forgot, the problem is if you have an unencrypted volume and you would like to migrate it to an encrypted type, the migration fails because there isn't enough space in the target to fit the entire source volume. And we discussed this many times, but this happens because an encrypted volume must have a header, which takes up some space, and Cinder isn't smart enough to handle this. We know that the amount of loss space varies between the encryption method we are using, but approximately is in megabytes. But one of the problems we have with this is that Cinder allocates in gigabytes, in G, so it's one point of concern. And I would like to suggest a new design, maybe to solve this problem. So the idea is currently volume size shows the requested size of the volume, but sometimes isn't the real size the storage in the backend. The idea is to add a new field in the model to store the real size and the display size. So yeah, we don't want the user to see the real size. It should show the requested size. Currently, API is using volume size to display the sizes. All API requests should report, instead of the volume size, the volume user size or something like that. And the extra size is for the encryption header or, I don't know, driver specific metadata, so it won't be used. And then, if you allow me, I like to talk you through one pros and cons. Pros, we don't want to show any additional field to the user. Show the user only what they requested. And the cons is it's going to be maybe a problem for driver maintainers because the size won't match. And an alternative, finally, as an alternative, we could store the display size in the volume metadata. So, yeah, that's basically what I like to discuss about this.
I would like to mention from a, let's say, a PM perspective, what this change means. It makes a shift of paradigm from what we currently do in Cinder, which is basically we behave like a laptop. Everybody using a laptop and encrypting a volume knows that inside they are going to have less available size because of the headers. And they understand it and they work with it. And that is how Cinder is currently working. This proposal takes it, makes it change the approach to a more cloudy approach, which is users don't care about this kind of thing. If they ask for 1 gigabyte, they want 1 gigabyte, encrypted or not. And they also want to be able to move it, migrate it, change it from encrypted to non-encrypted, add glance images in there, knowing the size of the glance image and the size of the volume. If both say 1 gigabyte, it should be able to be written in there. So this, the changes that Sophia proposed change the paradigm from what we currently do, which is the laptop or computer approach, to a cloud approach where everything is transparent for the user. And I think that is a very good idea and something that every single user that actually uses the encryption feature would love to see happening.
Yeah, thanks, Gorka.
So in terms of how the drivers work now, if we're going to ask for, so user asks for a 2G volume and they want it, it's going to be an encrypted type. We need to tell the driver, right, we want a 2G usable volume, and so you need to have extra space for the header. How are we going to, do we have a way to get that information to the driver? Or should we leave it to the driver to look at the volume type and then just say, oh, this is you asked for 2G, this is encrypted, I'll give you 2G plus 3 meg or something? Or what do we think? And especially for driver maintainers, this would be something to think of. What would be how do we want to handle this?
There are multiple things because we always implement, we need a generic approach, one that works even if somebody doesn't update their drivers, it must work. So it may not be efficient, it may be wasting a lot of space, doesn't matter, it needs to work. So there are two cases, one where they don't update and one where they update. So for the non-update, what Sophia was saying is we need to differentiate between the sizes. So we can tell the driver, this is the user asks for 1 gigabyte, and we tell the driver, create a 2 gigabyte volume. Because that's the minimum, the unit that we use. We increase the unit because we cannot give a smaller increment. So in that way, we can already create in Cinder the account for the overhead. The problem that this kind of approach has is for drivers like RBD. I think Eric was the one that pointed this out to me, that they use QEMU image to actually write everything in the volume, and QEMU image doesn't seem to be able to define the amount of space inside that you want. So you cannot just say create here you have a volume, but I just want you to create an encrypted partition where inside the partition, once I unencrypt, I have 1 gigabyte. I don't think that's possible. And that is something that Eric was pointed out to me.
Well, I think that's true regardless of whether you're using the QEMU image path or not.
But if we know the header size in, oh, I see what you mean. Yes. I see your point. Yeah. If I create a 2 GB, regardless of what I use, it will create a larger than 1 GB inside. Yeah, that is a big problem. Does anybody know if there is a way around this?
Around what exactly?
Around being able to create, once you unencrypt a volume, to be able to make sure that we have the exact size that we want inside, regardless of the size of the actual volume.
So I thought about this a bit, and I have not figured out the whole answer, but the thinking on that so far is that if that is possible, we're going to have to make sure that it doesn't change when we upgrade tools that we use, like crypt setup or QEMU image kind of thing. It's going to also have to account for at least LUX1 and LUX2. LUX2 defaults to a 16 megabyte header, which is larger than what we normally see for LUX1. That may be something that we could just explicitly configure and just pick a size for it. But I haven't gone to verify that yet. And then it's also gonna have to, we have to be sure that whatever math we do around that is consistent both for crypt setup and for QEMU image operations, because they're both writing LUX formatted volumes, but there's no guarantee that they are writing headers with the same parameters and, you know, whatever can change in them. So I think it might be possible, and I think we still need to figure that out, but it's not really clear yet if it's possible or not.
The other thing is just using this in the, not even worrying about the QEMU problem. So I ask for a 1 gigabyte volume. I get back something that Cinder tells me is a 1 gigabyte volume. Now when I look at what I've got, though, I've got a 1.8 gig of usable space in there. So I can fill it up.
That's the problem if we cannot do the QEMU image, give us the right size inside. Because if you will, so user says, I want 1 gigabyte encrypted volume. They attach it to the host. Nova attaches it. And suddenly if you check the size, it's 2 gigabytes. And you say, what? But the idea is that once you unencrypt it, so the path that will be passed by OS break to Nova, that one should be 1 gigabyte. Even if the whole volume is 1.8, that is the whole volume. But the idea is that after decrypting, you only get the size that you requested. Because that's the way that we can seamlessly move encrypted and unencrypted, by making sure that what we give the VMs, the consumer, is the size that they requested, the exact size they requested. And that is the problem that Eric pointed out. Like, we may not be able to request a size and get a size after decrypted. And that is definitely a huge problem, because if we cannot do that, then we have the same problem that we currently have.
Well, I still want to think through that part. So if we can't determine the exact size in advance, and then we create something which is bigger than what was requested. So there's two scenarios, right? One of them is it's a few megabytes bigger. One is that it's rounded up to the next gigabyte, I guess.
But once it's encrypted, it doesn't matter. All it matters is that it will be larger than what you requested and larger than the same request without an encrypted will get you. Even if it's 1 gigabyte, 100 bytes, or 1 gigabyte, 900 megabytes, it doesn't matter. It's larger. So now when you try to move that to unencrypted, it will not fit because it will be too large. So we have the same problem, but in reverse. The one that will be larger will be the encrypted. So we're back to a problem.
And just for some context, our experience so far in the bugs we've seen from customers is that I think moving from unencrypted to encrypted, which usually fails right now because of these problems that we're talking about fixing. Moving from unencrypted to encrypted is important because people who did not deploy volume encryption and want to enable it have to be able to do that somehow. And so if they run into these bugs now, the only way to do that is to transfer data in some other way, or attach multiple volumes and do it inside the instance or whatever. So it's an important use case for that reason. And the only reason that I'm spelling this out is because while we definitely don't want to break the reverse of that, I think the reverse is at least less common. But I do agree that we don't want to fix it in one direction just to break it the other way, because that's not great. But I don't know that, just from like a risk analysis point of view, I don't know that we see people going from encrypted to unencrypted very often.
Subhaka, you were saying that when we create, when we retype from unencrypted to encrypted, then we create a larger volume, but we only report the actual volume size. Like it becomes 2 GB also, then the actual size was reported will be 1 GB, right?
Yeah, the idea is, Sophia mentioned, is we have to tell different lies to the user and to the driver. To the driver, because the driver may not be up to date and they may be using volume.size. If the user asks for 1 gigabyte and we ask the driver to create a 2 gigabyte because we want to have extra space for the headers, we need to tell the driver that it's 2 gigabytes what we want, because the driver has not been updated and all they can understand is to look at volume.size. So the user says 1 gigabyte, we tell the driver 2 gigabytes. But we have to be careful, because if we store 2 gigabytes in volume.size, when the user asks the API, tell me the size, we would be telling 2 gigabytes, and they would not understand why a 1 gigabyte volume request suddenly turns into 2 gigabytes. So we have to translate to the user and always tell them what they ask, regardless of what we do internally. So that's why Sophia was saying we will need two fields, and we will need to tell one thing to the driver and another to the user. The user should always get what they ask, or at least think that they get what they ask.
So to achieve this, we are planning to have a different attribute for the volume, which we are going to display to the user. So I was thinking, when we retype from encrypted to unencrypted, then can't we use this new size from the DD operation till 1 GB only, and like we in retype we already create a new volume, so just create it to the size that we report to the user and just create it to that.
Sorry, I couldn't understand half of that. Sorry. I don't know if you could repeat it. Yeah.
Yeah, I can repeat it. Yeah. So
Thanks.
I was saying we will be adding a new attribute to the volume that will report the size that we will display to the user, right?
Well, we still have to figure that part out, how we are going to tell the drivers this, because there are drivers that will be able to, each driver has a different increment capability. So some drivers, when you ask for 1 GB volume, they actually create 8 GB. So while others, they can do only on 1 GB increments, another can do in megabytes. So you could ask for just 20 more megabytes for the headers, or 100, or something smaller. So we will have to figure out a way to tell the drivers that. But I think that is overall a smaller problem than the one that Eric mentioned, of being able to actually get the right size inside, because in the worst case, we just give 1 GB. The first implementation could just be, just give me 1 more gigabyte. I don't care. That's the worst that can happen. We don't optimize. I don't know if that answers, or if I just went.
Well, the interesting side effect if you do that is you end up with what one of our customers, I think, actually ended up doing as a workaround for this, which was that every time you do this migration, you add a gigabyte and the volume gets bigger and bigger to it, which is not great for somebody who needs to do this very often.
Yeah, but the idea is, if we are internally controlling the increment and know the difference between the size inside, the size the user gets, you don't have that problem. Because when you move it to move to encrypted, you don't keep increasing the size. The size increases once, and now when you, for example, decrypt it or encrypted, what you do is you can fit it in the 1 GB, so you just not increase again. At least it's a small advantage, but that is only if we can get the right size inside. Otherwise, like you said, we would keep increasing the size. So I like the idea that Sophia is proposing of keeping the different sizes, but I really think that we need to figure out a way to get what we want, which is the right size inside.
Yeah, well, it's definitely worth us going and trying to dig into that and see how it works and whether we can do it in all cases. So that'll definitely be one of the action items here, is for me and Sophia to just go explore that and figure out exactly what you can and can't do with each of the tool sets involved, and Lux 1 versus Lux 2 and all those concerns.
Yeah, because I think for doing things manually, we could always, probably it's not nice, it's a hack, it's garbage, but we can probably figure out a way by creating, if we can have the exact size, we know the exact overhead of the headers, we can get the big volume, 2 gigabytes, and then create 2 partitions, and then just use one of the partitions. It's not right. It's not nice because you are, as soon as the header changes, everything breaks. You come back again to a problem. But that is the only approach that I can think of, which is using partitions if the tooling doesn't allow to do it the right way. And then OSBRIC would have to know about these partitions, of course, because it would have to return the right partition, not just any of them. So we probably have a way to do this. It's just that I don't like it. And I'm sure you don't like it either, the partition.
Yeah, it ends up getting really complicated.
Yep. But I like this. I like this change, not working like laptops and making everything seamless. I don't know if anybody else has an opinion on this.
I don't know. I'm still. So we will probably have the problem that if you fill up your encrypted volume and then that you think is only 1 gig, if you try to, oh, maybe it's, I don't know.
Now, well, the thing is that I would run this the scenario with an hypothesis, which is we can get the right user size. We can get the user the right volume size. Like they ask for 1 gigabyte, we give them exactly 1 gigabyte encrypted volume. So the unencrypted volume will always have the right size. Whether it's because if it was unencrypted from the start, or whether we had to decrypt it to give the user the volume, if we can get the right size there, then everything is going to work. So our challenge is that, get the right size inside.
Okay.
Right? After that, it doesn't matter.
Okay.
We will have to code it, but
Right. Okay.
and we will have to know how much space is actually being used. Why? Because if we do this approach, well, it depends. If we only do the approach of incrementing by 1 gigabyte, it doesn't matter how much overhead the header adds. But if we don't, and we start leveraging drivers that can do smaller increments, let's say, and we end up calling and saying, just give me 20 more gigabytes, then we have to know how much is the smallest size that we want, because for some volumes, when we are migrating between backends, one will be 2 gigabytes for 1 gigabyte content, and the other maybe 1.1. So we need to know how much data we move between them.
Why don't we make this configurable?
Well, the thing is that it's, when you say configurable, you mean how much extra we want?
Yeah, like a default extra, and then possibly have the drivers provide a new API saying, I need this much extra for an encrypted volume versus whatever, and the different backends could provide their different values, and then if the driver provides that value, then use that over the default.
Yeah, I was thinking something like that, but in reverse. Well,
Okay.
not exactly in reverse, but the manager tells the driver, I need at least this much for the header. And the driver says, okay, I cannot do that, or I can do that, but this is the size I can do. And use that, yes. But we still need to know how much overhead we have as the minimum, which is what the manager tells them. So that then we can move them, because if one backend says, I will create 3 extra gigabytes, and another says, I will create 100, when you're going to migrate them, you don't want to migrate everything. You just need to migrate the minimum that is required.
Right. And are we going to allow fractions of a gig?
That's the thing, that if we only want 20 megabytes and a backend can do 20 megabyte increment, it's a little too much to create like an extra gigabyte, unless
Yeah.
it's in provision where they may not care.
But then does Cinder keep track of that 20 megabytes as allocated, and the scheduler knows about it, and et cetera, et cetera?
Well, yeah, the scheduler will probably need to change as well and use the actual size of the driver. So everything except the user would use the actual size of the volume.
Well, sort of.
In the quota, we use also the user. Sorry,
Right. Well, I was going to say sort of. Things like quotas that are user facing, we want to use the requested size and not the actual size.
Yep. So quota, API, but yeah,
So
those.
if that's the case, then if they requested to migrate a volume that's 10 gigs and the back end says, well, I need another 5 gigs to do the encrypted space, what do we report as a quota? Because from a deployer, I want to know that the user is using that 5 extra gigs and charge them for it.
What I think we should do is probably, yeah, when we report in the, so there are two things. You can check the database where you will have it, and when we report the quota usage via notification system, we return the volume with the information. So in there, if we can, whoever is doing the charges can look at the different information and decide whether they want to charge extra for the actual size, charge just a bit extra for it being encrypted, or charge only for the use. So as long as we report both, all the information in the notification, I think we should be right. Okay. Right, Walter? I don't know if Blue Jeans died on him or if he's just muted.
I think he's muted.
Okay. Well, but in any case, that is definitely something that we will have to document and make it explicit so that whoever is making it charging, users can actually know what they want to do. Because there are, as I said, to charge, you have those 3 options. You charge by what they actually use. To charge a bit more because it's encrypted, so it's like an extra. Or you charge by what the backend is actually saying that it's using. But as long as we provide that information, they will be able to do whatever they need to.
All right, so it sounds like there's still several things that we need to figure out before we can move forward with this.
Yeah, I think the next action is figure out how to do the right size inside. Because before we try to write a proper spec, spelling everything out, I think we need to know where we stand regarding that.
The other thing that we need to nail down a bit is, maybe this will be in the spec or maybe it'll end up being in some other documentation, but we need to kind of list out for users today what actually doesn't work right and what the scenarios are where this comes up. And we probably should have discussed this at the beginning of this discussion, but the primary ones are volume migration, where you're going from unencrypted to encrypted, is one of the common ones. And the other one is creating a volume from an image that's an encrypted volume, and the image is an exact multiple of gigabytes, which can easily happen just because someone put one in Glance that was that size, or if you do volume upload to image, it will happen there. So kind of in parallel to the process of fixing this stuff, we probably should get out some known issue documentation around where this breaks and what we know is an issue now. And the third one is, I think it's still an open question if this presents itself in the backup restore process anywhere. I don't think anybody's gone and proven that one way or the other.
The answer is yep. To the open question, yep, it impacts backups.
I'm assuming it does.
Definitely.
I just haven't seen anyone complain about it yet, but I would assume it's going to show up in there somewhere.
Yep. Very good point.
Okay. Yeah, I just like to add another known issue, the one that created an encrypted volume from a snapshot. We also fail because it was Cinder forced to resize, and because of that we lose the encryption header. But it looks like it's only an RBD issue. I need to double check with another drivers.
But in theory, I think, Sophia, that could be solved by your other approach, the general approach, where you create a volume with the right size. I think that could probably solve it.
Yeah, another thing that maybe I can mention is that the tempests we currently have, they are not failing, and some scenarios that maybe have when user encryption. So another action would be to double check some of that.
Well, we know that we need new Tempest tests to prove out this kind of stuff. So I've got one on Cinder Tempest plugin that I submitted as a work in progress that tests the volume clone path and then looks inside the instance to make sure that the disk is the same size. It currently fails after it actually passes the test assertions with some cleanup stuff that I haven't figured out why it doesn't work yet. But it does run far enough to actually at least do the test that it was attempting to do. So that I will at some point go figure out how to get the cleanup portion to actually work. But basically, we're going to need new Tempest tests for volume clone from volume clone from snap, create from image, and all these things because, well, if we had those tests now, we would have known about these issues a while ago. And I think we're going to need them as part of fixing this. So the test that I wrote examines the size of the block device inside the instance, and then it just MD5s the whole disk, which I think gets you around the figuring out how to fill it up and that kind of thing.
Okay, anything else on this? Sophia, you need anything else you need from us right now?
I don't know if someone else would like to add any thoughts about this from the other driver maintainers, apart from RVD. No, I don't have another apart from that.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
All right, Fernando, I'm probably have to move yours to tomorrow.
No problem.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. And
Yeah,
then,
we can do it tomorrow.
all right, so we've got like 2 minutes. So one thing I want to point out, as long as driver people are here, is line 519. This is sort of associated with the MyPy work Eric's doing, but I noticed a patch that Gorka has up recently. It's basically this: in the unit tests, right? We're testing some particular stuff, but we do want to try to be accurate, at least with respect to the mocks that are being used, because you can get different behaviors. So one thing is, in a lot of the unit tests, dicts are used instead of actual objects that you get to do things. So I just happened to come across this good example of just changing that for some tests. That they, instead of using a dict, they're actually using an oscillative version object, and it's actually pretty easy to do because there's a lot of infrastructure built into the test so that you can do that easily. So anyway, you can take a look at that where that's done in a recent patch just to see. So just something to be aware of as you're looking at your tests, certainly as you're writing new tests, and also reviewers of new tests. Be aware of this too.
Yeah. I think at least on the NetApp drivers, it's like we are using dictionaries for everything. So yeah, I'm just looking at the code you just you put in the Etherpad. Yeah, that would be much better to use those. Maybe like what happens is that basically we have some base from like a previous unit test, and we just follow the pattern that's like going on in the that we have from the past. So maybe it's in like at least for the new unit test, we should considering using stop using dicts for that. And maybe thinking about a refactoring as well, that would take some time. Maybe we can do it as long as we make changes to features. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I'm just thinking in terms of, yeah, I'm not requesting everybody do a big rewrite, but in terms of, like, in this case, if you're touching some tests, just be aware of that, and you can include that in the changes that you make. And then eventually we'll get to a good state. Any other general comments? So the gate tests for AA coverage of a driver, I don't think we have anything that can actually test active-active.
Yes, we don't. Unfortunately, we don't. But from my experience, we can test active setup with dampest, and sometimes it finds some issues. So
So you mean
at least we need
just
them.
configure it for active-active and run regular Tempest, and you might get lucky? Or,
Yes, or unlucky.
yeah, depends how you look at it, right? Okay. All right. Next session is the cross-project session with Glance. So Rajat's basically going to be leading that. So for that, we're going to transfer over to MeetPad. Let me, so if you're looking in the, so if you look in the Etherpad, there's a link to MeetPad. Probably you should close, I don't know what happens if you keep all these things open. My system can't handle it. So I'm going to close out BlueJeans. So we'll take the team picture there. So please come over.
Sorry, where's the MeetPad link? I was trying to find it.
Oh, okay. It's line 524. I'll also post it here in the chat as long as or just somebody did. Oh, Sophia just posted it. Oh, no, yes, that is. Okay. So does everybody have the link? Okay, great.
Yep.
I'll see you over in MeetPad in about a minute. I'm going to stop the recording and then shut this down. And thanks for a productive day. We'll pick up with Fernando's. Fernando, do you want to go first tomorrow? I think that would make sense.
No problem. Yeah.
Is that okay for you? Okay, time-wise. All right, I'll move that over. So we'll be all set. All right, great.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody. I'll see you in MeetPad in a few minutes.
Thanks.
All right. See you there.